in the first of our WBUR New Youth Takeover series designed to empower high school and college students through conversations and deep exploration of issues led by young people themselves. I'm Dawry Ruiz, the student co-moderator and producer for the series. For the next hour, we're going to dig deep on gun violence in the United States. After the deadly shooting in Uvalde, Texas, an urgent appeal for gun control measures has again become a national debate. But often missing from the conversation are the voices of students themselves. Policymakers and others are making decisions for us, and the urgency of now is upon us. Guns are impacting the spaces that we are expected to learn in. What can be done? My guests this hour are Dawry Rivera, founder of the Artist Initiative for Revolution. Also, Amina McDowell, a student at Boston Latin Academy and president of the Black Student Union. I'd also like to welcome Kanisha Germain, a recent high school graduate in Boston. We want to hear from you. We're taking your questions. Head over to Slido and enter hashtag #YouTakeover to submit any questions. So let's jump right in. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? So the first question I'd like to ask everyone is, following the recent shootings in Uvalde, Texas, what was the reaction among you and your peers, specifically in your school? We can start with Danny and then go around.
Sounds good. Well, I'm a little bit older than Amina and Kanisha, not much, but I will say that being in college comes with a different level of interaction socially, politically, and that's been a part of my pursuit is creating sustainability in the post-secondary education development so that we can have more of these conversations and be more engaged and not just be out partying, right? But I will say corporately, holistically, I don't have an answer for my classmates, but personally among myself and other people that I hang around, the homies, there wasn't much of a response. And our silence was not a reaction or a signification of our lack of engagement. It wasn't a lack of our care. In fact, it was because we are engaged. It is because we care. And there was no other way for me personally to respond to that matter beyond my activism, beyond my response as an artist, but to sit there and weep. And that's what we did. I sat down with one of my closest friends and we sat in a Cafe Nero when we got the alert and we wept. So that was our response.
Amina?
I feel like, well, it's a bit different for me because I am in high school, so we were in school around the time. I think for me personally, I think for a lot of other my peers, I've had like a similar experience where like there's not really much we can say or do because like we're so used to it. Like, you know, we don't really have like I think people were definitely devastated and I definitely was like really surprised, but like we kind of just had to move on with our everyday lives. Like no one really stopped and was like, wow, this is really messed up. We kind of just like, wow, and then we moved on with our day. I don't think I really talked about it with my friends. I think the only time that like I had a discussion was like a week or two ago. Somebody came in from like a news station and interviewed me and a couple other kids in my school and asked us how we felt about like gun violence in schools and stuff like that. So that was like the only like discussion, or like that's the only time I ever heard like, my peers discuss like how they felt about the school shooting and how it affected them. But no one really had like a big response that I know of.
Kanisha?
Sadly, the same sentiment that's been going around has also come up within my peer group and at school. I mean, the only time where we truly considered what had happened was in terms of trying to be more mindful of how we let people in and out of our school, like to try to take more preventative measures than it is to actually really understand that this is something that has happened way too frequently and that it is overall just a saddening thing that we should really, it's not something that we actually talked about in and of itself of a specific situation, but just as an overall problem that we have in our society.
Yeah, mass shootings, they have become tragically common in the United States. I feel like, Amina, you said something like we've gotten used to it, almost desensitized. Um, have there been specific discussions in your schools about school shootings and other gun violence, like in your classrooms by your teachers or guidance counselors?
We actually had a case in my school where they found bullets in a bag in a loading dock in the basement. No one really knows what happened. We still don't know. It was like maybe a month or two ago. Um, that was like the only time I remember us having like a sit down discussion because it was like it hit way too close to home. We had we had like another shooting. It wasn't school related. It was like outside. It was near a school, near a park, and it was a really big deal because like I didn't hear about it from my teachers. I heard about it from the app on my phone. Like Citizens is the only reason I know why so much stuff is happening because like I get an alert by my phone like, oh, so and so is happening, like 400 feet away from you. So we had like a small discussion about the shooting by my school, and they were just saying how like they didn't really address anything. They just said it happened and that they were in contact with the police. And then like a couple days later, we found bullets at our school, and we had to sit down in class, like first period, and our teachers had to pull out like this document and read it to us, saying how like talking about like what the school would do if there was an actual shooting, and then we had to write down our feelings about how we think the school is going to react, like how everything is happening, stuff like that. But like I think that was the only time we've ever had like a discussion because like it hit way too close to home, and like with the shooting near our school, and then finding like actual like a duffel bag of bullets and ammunition near our school, like it really made them like it really made everyone on edge. But people like forgot about it, like the next couple days.
What about you guys, Danny and Kanisha?
I'm sorry, is it all right if I ask you to reiterate your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know what were the discussions that are being had in your school, whether with a teacher in a classroom or a guidance counselor or just as a whole school, about gun violence and school shootings in general.
In my school, it's not as though they went out of their way to kind of like congregate us and actively talk about it, but they said that they would leave some time aside or at least suggest to teachers and faculty to take a moment and can like talk about it amongst their students. I can't say if it happened like throughout because each teacher is different as to how they would approach the situation, but I do know that they at least had made an effort to acknowledge the situation and wanted to foster some sort of discussion. Within my classes, I don't remember having something like the conversation started that day, but I do know that there was an opportunity to do so.
I'm hearing everything that is being said, and also in the last 4 minutes have been able to reach back to past testimonials of experiences in schools. And my biggest concern with conversations around preventative actions in academia, in schools, across universities, is that in fact, our response should not be, or our reaction should not be what the response is in the case that a gunman or a school shooting happens, but it most definitely should be about how we're training up this generation to not just do the work in pursuing a more just and equitable society where gun violence is not as prevalent as it is now, but also to be holding those accountable who already have the degrees, who have been in those seats for years, some decades. What scares me about preventative action steps in schools is that it doesn't actually solve the problem. We just continue to cover the wound and we don't allow it to air out so that we can have a serious conversation about what the issue is. I'm sorry to hear, Amina, that there were gun bullets found in the basement of your school, wherever it was. I think that, and the fact that Boston as a whole has not tended to that and amplified that as even more of a reason to get guns off the street and out of the hands of people is what's most concerning to me. I'm shocked to hear that.
Yeah, Danny, I want to follow that up. We have a first audience question talking about, you were referencing like preventative measures. What would you like teachers to do in order to improve teaching or talking around these tragedies? What is a step that you think teachers and administrative staff can take?
Well, let me just say, one, it's not the job of the teacher to make sure that students don't have to come into school and be shot up. It's not. I'm not saying that it's not a priority of educators to keep their kids safe. Yes, that's important. As an educator myself, I understand the significance and role and meaning in operating with a level of consciousness and safety. But the question should not be what should educators and teachers do? It's what should the people that are in charge be doing to make sure that there are preventative actions set in place. And that's not by putting a security guard in front of the door and checking. That's what it solely is. Yes, I know that that's a part of protocol, but even that perpetuates another level of systemic oppression, because when we look and we see where the metal detectors are being placed at, is being placed in schools that are predominantly Black and brown filled, in neighborhoods that have, in many ways also been impacted by gun violence, but through the lens of gang intervention, right? Or gang engagement. So for me, it's not just about educators being and finding necessary ways to keep their kids safe. At the bare minimum, that is okay, but that's the bare minimum. And we, as a nation, as a city, have relied on the bare minimum. And that's why there's even burnout among teachers and educators, which is a whole nother conversation. So when we speak about what does sustainability look like in terms of safety for educators and their students, it is not their responsibility. It's like saying that it's my job as a Black man to make sure that I don't get killed by a police officer. How crazy does that sound? But yet that's my reality, Dawry, that I have to walk out and make sure that I don't have a hood on my head, that I have to walk out and make sure that I'm being cautious of my surroundings, that I don't bump into a certain person that could cause for a level of interaction that is beyond my control, that then falls into the hands of someone else. So for educators, I will say, yes, don't grow weary in doing well. Keep doing what you do. We appreciate that. And know that we need to fight and advocate for systems that will support you so that you can do your job and teach. Because you didn't get your degree to be a safety monitor to make sure that no one's coming into school with guns. You got your degree in teaching so that you can impact lives. Let's keep that there.
We are on the brink of a Supreme Court decision that is coming at any moment now. And it will challenge a century-old law in New York that restricts who can carry a gun in public and requires people to obtain a special license. If the court overturns the New York law, it could have implications on gun laws in Massachusetts, seeing that we have very similar laws, some of the most strongest laws in the country. Does that make you worried, especially for our schools? A lot of the time when we talk about gun violence, in schools, it's in reference to gang violence. Do you think that, like, are you worried? Like, what is the reaction, especially since the Supreme Court, you know, has been leaving us out of the conversation? What are your opinions? Let's start with Kanisha.
The answer to this question I find is somewhat tricky due to, I mean, it depends on where you grew up for that to really dictate your answer. I mean, the high school that I grew up in, it's like, yes, it still is Boston, but not really what people would consider a dangerous part of Boston, if that makes sense, you know? Like, it's, there are some communities that people would consider to be more dangerous than others. And then that is where you would feel more concerned about this law being changed and everything. And that's where a lot of people would take issue. But dependent on where you are, then it's not to say that that's not going to affect you, but that changes on how you would react to it. And in which case, like, I don't really know how I feel because I'm now going into college and it's a completely different environment and community that is foreign to me. And I have no idea how this law will impact where I go to school compared to where I used to grow up. I don't know.
Amina, what do you think?
I feel like it's similar to me. Because like my school, like except for the bullet thing, I haven't really interacted with anything like I haven't really had like an issue with guns in the past, or like I've never been impacted by it. So I don't think the law is gonna like change that much for me, because I'm pretty sure the people that are getting the guns are going through the law. Like people that are harming schools are going through the law in their states, and you know they're legally allowed to own the gun. So I don't really know, to be honest. It's not. I feel like that's not the thing I think about when I'm thinking about like gun violence in my school. If I'm safe in my school, I'm more thinking about like, because like for gang violence, most people aren't able to just go and get a gun. If that makes sense, like people that are committing gang violence and people that are committing school violence, it's a very, very different demographic and very, very different like reasons. So I really don't know.
Danny, as you're in higher education, where where you're surrounded more by the population of like public citizens and less in a controlled environment of students, how do you think that's going to impact your institution?
I wanna recognize this, and who knows if I'll get in trouble for this, but I was, before this call, was looking to find out more about what's been going on in New York. And this came up on my phone. Concealed carry-on weapon permit, 50% off special. I don't know what any of this stuff means, but I want you to recognize that because we live in such a capitalistic, Western, racist society, whether we legislate it or not, it's already been legislated so that they could implement it into the system so that they could be able to do what they wanted to do and have the backing of the law. So in the same way how that happened and occurred however long ago, I mean, the time of the Constitution, right? I don't even care at that point, lets me know that there's a huge concern with who's been controlling the narrative. So when we talk about the Supreme Court decision, we know that obviously there are only a select number of them, and not all of us can be engaged in that process in the ways that we need to be. But that's why representation matters, because the people who are sitting at the table who come from our lived experience, who can hear us, right, hear us out, to be able to have conversations with us, can then make an informed decision on what the people want. My biggest concern right now, Dawry, is that that's not happening. It's not happening in politics. It's not happening in the legislative level in the way that it needs to be. We have great people like, our senators and our U.S. representatives who are doing great work in pursuit of what we need. But that does not outweigh people who are doing and creating narratives that in no way will help us out. And to see an ad like that, and to, while I'm on this conversation, right, about gun reform and about safety in schools, is worrisome. And I'm at a very small institution right now, but I have a lot of friends who are at larger institutions where I feel like, I mean, I don't, who can say this, but I feel like the weight is a little bit heavier. And so I am concerned. I'm not just concerned though for my college friends. I'm concerned for the preschoolers and for the first graders who have no idea about what's going on. Those are the people that I'm worried about, and also who don't know how to articulate the fact that they need safety, right, beyond their parents or their guardians. So I'm worried. I'm very worried. And that's why I think that the seat belongs to the people. And we need to find better ways of engaging. And we need to push for systems that allow for that to happen without restrictions.
This kind of leads me to my next, to the next audience question is, as young folk, do y'all feel like you have adequate spaces? And I think this is a two-part questions, and resources to be heard, and then also to process the traumatic events that you are living through. I feel like, Danny, you kind of spoke to this, but Amina, you referenced an event that happened in your school. Did you feel like you had the spaces and resources to be heard and then also process?
I feel like I had the spaces to be heard because I went to go find those spaces. I feel like if I didn't go find those spaces, I would never have talked about it. I'm lucky to have a mom that's very open with me, and my mom is very supportive of me, and my mom has always made sure that I am up to date with everything, and that I know what I know what rights I have basically, and like, you know, that it's okay to talk about how things are affecting me. I don't have to keep those in. But I feel like definitely for some of my classmates or peers, even my friends, I don't feel like they had that outlet to talk about like how this made them feel, because I genuinely felt unsafe at school. Like I don't think I've ever had a issue where I've been like, oh, I don't feel safe at school. Like I genuinely felt unsafe at school. Like people were not showing up at school. My mom was like, are you sure you have to go to school the next day? We were thinking like, you know, maybe they won't do anything because they just found the bullet. So it's safe for you to go to school this day, but you know, maybe we should watch out for this week. So because I like went to go find those spaces, and because I have like such a supportive system, I was able to talk about those. I don't think that I had enough time to process, to be very, very honest, because I had to just jump back into schoolwork. I go to a very rigorous school, obviously, and the bullet thing was not talked about that much in my school. It was talked about for one day, and we moved on. I saw one news article about it, and I thought, because like I go to a pretty big school, you know, I go to one of the 3 exam schools, so I thought, you know, maybe like people would be talking about it. And apparently, my teacher was telling me how her friend works at an elementary school, and they also found bullets in a toilet at their school 2 weeks in a row, and it's an elementary school. And then my mom was telling me about how at another elementary school, like in like the same frame time, they found bullets at their school. So it's like it wasn't just one school, and I haven't seen anyone talk about it. Like I looked it up, I didn't see anyone talk about it. So definitely didn't have time to process, but I just kind of moved on because I had to move on. I have other things I have to worry about. I can't worry about my safety and my grades and my future at the same time. Like I have to focus on one thing.
Kanisha, do you feel the same way? Even if events haven't really happened at your school, do you feel like you have the resources when something does happen in the country to talk about that and process that?
I feel as though in my school, if it follows a similar path as to what Amina explained, like we will have, they'll bring up the idea that we have a space to be able to talk and that we can go seek people out. But I feel like in which case, if you really want the other students to talk or to be able to like contribute how they're feeling, you have to make a space happen for them, if that makes sense. Like you can say that it's there and give them the opportunity to go on their own accord, but sometimes there are people who will either just not want to go out on their own and do that because maybe they may not know someone as well, like a guidance counselor or a social worker, or maybe they don't really know where to go, they just know it exists. But if you were to already have that in like a classroom and have people like have that discussion happen from a teacher or peers that they feel comfortable with. That's something to start. The closest thing that I had in my school to this, there was one Zoom call that they had mandated for like all students to be in. And it was talking about like school safety and people that you can trust in your school to go talk to. And there was some response to that, but I feel like not in the way how my school wanted it to be, in terms of like it was like watching a massive PSA throughout the entire school versus like actually having conversations about it. And I see what they're trying to do and the thought processes that are there, but we all know that it didn't really have the same impact that it could have been compared to like teachers just dedicating a class period, asking questions and having students going around and talking. I'm not saying that one would be like a greater success, but at least those who feel more comfortable in, talking and being able to share their thoughts and ideas, that's a better thing than basically watching a massive PSA.
Danny, I don't know if it's similar to my institution, but we get like alerts whenever something happens on campus or close to campus. But personally, we never really talk about anything that happens on campus. You'll see the like school Instagram posts of like, we hope that everyone is, safe, blah, blah, blah. I know the most recent thing that happened on campus, they came out and said, we pride ourselves on having a relatively safe space. And I don't know if that's the standard for any environment. I don't want it to be relatively safe, but I want to know like what are like the procedures on like an institution that might be a little bit smaller for you.
Dawry, please know that is the standard for most institutions in America. And that's why I built AIR, to disrupt the system and to build a higher standard. Kanisha brings and touches on a great point about moving from a very traditional way of handling moments of grief, collective grief, by just making this PSA and moving on and shifting to a more transformative justice lens and framework in terms of how we choose to collectively heal as a community. And through AIR, we found ways to cultivate art as a form of healing. And now, right, institutions are calling left and right, trying to figure out, well, how are you doing this? How are you doing this? Because we center humanity in the conversation. No, Dawry, please know that my school that only has maybe 250 students at max, they are not handling it better just because there are less students on campus. They're not. The same thing that you're getting at a large PWI is the same thing that I'm getting at a small PWI, right? That's the standard. And that's why now there's a level of disengagement. And that's why post-secondary education is not being sustained in the way that it used to, because people are catching along to the fact that, well, if you're so focused on my development, if you're so focused on my ability to progress in my education and in my liberation and knowledge, then why are we not having conversations about what's going on in the real world? What's happening in my day in, day out reality? So not much has changed, not much is different. I'm not saying that there's not progress. There's great progress and there's a stride to continue the work. But we need to take on a very transformative, restorative way of looking at these incidents so that we are finding the space to heal, to grow. But it won't happen if we don't address the problem from the root.
I want to touch on something that all of you have mentioned, but we haven't really delved deep into it. And it's the idea that these institutions in our schools just move on and we don't really have time to process. And there was an audience question that touches on this is, without the space for processing, how does that impact our mental health and the mental health of our friends and colleagues, especially since they may address it, but we don't really have that time to process because we have to continue learning and are expected to continue learning, or we're still organizing in our communities and we're not really dealing with that. So, and this can go to anyone, but how does that impact our mental health?
You know what it does? It eats you up at night. You can't sleep. You can't focus on schoolwork. Right? You become distracted with things that only give you a temporary high or fix to get through it. And this is the reality for a lot of people, but specifically for our generation. And if we want to center mental health in this conversation and the mental stigma that has been birthed as a result of a lack of ownership from our legislative parties, from our democracy, from our society in terms of how it's being led, then we need to be honest. And it's a disgrace to know that we can be in school, breeze past this, and know that it's in the back of our minds because we're all traumatized, and still be expected to not just turn in work for a grade, but to turn in work at a certain caliber for a specific grade, just so that a number can get us into the school of our dreams. Right? That's messed up.
It's very true.
That's messed up. I'm interested to hear what the other panelists have to say, because one just graduated high school and another one's still in high school. And we know that that is even more prevalent in those spaces because it is about a grade, right? Like I haven't checked my grades in months because I don't care about that. I care about my mental health. I care about mental. I don't care about a number.
I feel like it's a bit different for me because I am still in high school, and like you said, I do want to go to my dream school. Like I really want to get out of here. I want to go do something,
and you will, Amina, and you will, because you're committed to the reality and prioritizing your mental health. But if you don't prioritize it, then when you get to the space that you've been dreaming of since you were a little girl, right? Then you don't have the same level of enthusiasm because society has robbed that from you. So I'm saying keep that near your heart.
Yeah, no, I think because my mom and my family, we've always prioritized education. It's always been a big thing. But then I also like feel like for my grandma, she prioritizes like education. She's like, you have to go to college, you have to do this. My mom does the same thing, but my mom is more of like more modern, I guess. And she's like, you also have to take care of your mental health. So I think that like, I have a class right now and it's been horrible for me. It's been like I choose to either do this classwork or do my other classwork. It's like it takes me hours a day. I've never failed a class before. I've not gone below a C until I got into high school, and it really kills you. It's really hard to deal with that. And so I think that like sometimes I have to just realize that I'm not going to be able to, there's certain things I'm just not going to be able to do. So I have to just realize that like I take days for myself, which is really hard because I do go to an exam school, and I don't know if any of you went to exam school. I have friends that went to exam school, but it's not the best, but it's supposed to prepare me for my future. So I have to focus on the things, and I have to get good grades. I cannot fail, but I feel like in college it'll be, I don't think it'll be easier at all, but I think it'll be where I don't have to worry about my grades getting me into like another school, because right now I'm just working to get into another school. But it's really hard to balance mental health. And then like what you were saying, like how do I deal with it if I don't have time to process? It's just I don't deal with it. I keep it and I keep working and I keep myself busy and I keep going until like, eventually I have to think about it. Because I do have a little brother. He's going to the second grade next year. I'm really I think I'm kind of scared for him because like he's going to be in elementary school, and I don't think he's talked about school shootings at all. I don't think he's ever had to have that conversation, and to have to explain to my little brother who's so excited to go in second grade, like you might be in danger at school, like that's just that's a lot to take in, and that's like a lot to handle. And think I'm ready to handle it because, I still, I'm going to be a junior next year. I still have 2 more years of high school to go through. So it's like my mom is going to have to deal with like talking to 2 of her kids about, how they might be unsafe out in the real world, but then also at school. So it's like I don't really have time to deal with it, but eventually I will have to.
Kanisha, how are you feeling? Especially just graduating.
Sorry, I was giving you room in case you had an additional question from the audience, and I wasn't trying to.
No, you're okay.
In a general sense, in terms of like mental health in school at the same time, I have tried to put my mental health in the back seat for the sake of school for the longest time, but there's only so long you can do that before it inevitably does catch up to you, because mental health ties in with just as much as your physical health and well-being. It's like if you were to have a sick or a cold and you feel the sore throat and you try to pretend it's not coming, but no matter what you do, it's coming. So you just got it's gonna come up to you eventually, whether you want to admit it or not. Your mental health will do the same thing to you. And in terms of like trying to manage, a school life and a social life, and then putting your mental health on the back seat, it's just not a good thing to do for yourself. And I had to learn that the hard way in my last year. And with everything that's been going on in addition to that, it just did not aid to the situation. I failed to mention this, but there was just no, ironically, even though we are talking about like school shootings, there probably was a better point to bring it up, but I just figured like, unless prompted, not going to. But there was a point in my school year where we heard of like a threat coming to our school. And it's weird that we were getting updates about it throughout time. Like we were told that we heard of a threat that someone was going to bring something and do something horrible to the school. And it was like sent out to all the families and parents. And it was pretty much up to us to make a decision as to whether or not we're going to either stay home or go. They didn't explicitly say it like that, but they didn't just decide to shut down the school day because it was a warning, of course. They had heard possible chances of it, but they weren't like, oh yeah, we are hearing this, we're going to shut down the school. Instead, they just decided to do some investigation and found out that it came from another state. But, after they were like, oh yeah, it came from another state, we're going to now proceed on because this is no longer a problem here. Danny's right. It does eat at you, to know that was like a possible thing and everyone just had an overnight scare, but we're going to have to just keep going and move on from it. It's like, you can't really sit down at your desk normally the next day and just act like it didn't happen, to not think in the back of your mind, well, things could just as quickly escalate as they could de-escalate, It's just, I'm never going to really forget that. It's already been months since it came up, but I'm never going to really forget that and realize, oh yeah, we just kind of went back into the normal day-to-day life. Like that didn't really happen. Like they put in the effort of trying to track things down and they brought up police and maybe amped up security at the school for a few days or so. And then we just kind of turned back into our normal life. And it's just like, school doesn't necessarily contribute to making your mental health better, but that did not help it at all. It's just, your mental health's already declining when you're at school, and that just did not help it. It just doesn't help it. I don't know. It just it leaves you at a loss for words.
I'm sorry you had to experience that, Kanisha. Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to touch on was the conversation around when a school shooting happens and the race of it. When the school shooter is white, a lot of the time they are labeled as having a mental health issue, or they just did not have the proper, education, etc. But when it is someone of color, it is usually labeled as a terrorist attack or something of that level, considering that all the people on the panel here are of color. That impacts us more, or it's labeled as gang violence. I feel like while we may not be directly involved in gang violence, we are still perceived by the way that we look and the people we associate with. What are your responses to this debate and to this conversation when political leaders are labeling the shooters?
Sorry. I was just gonna say, I have never heard of it. I mean, maybe there's been, but I don't think there's ever been like a Black school shooter, and I don't remember those. I might be wrong, but I just know the majority, I hate to say it, but the majority of school shooters are white men. And I feel like I'm not from Massachusetts. I'm actually from Arizona. I moved over here in 8th grade. So, the majority of schools that I've gone to, like in the 8th grade, I remember this boy, he kept like making jokes about like school shootings and blah, blah, blah. And I remember being genuinely scared because he was a part of that demographic. And, he fit like everything, like they gave us like a checklist, like a long, long time ago of like what to look out for, stuff like that. Cause I remember it was during, what's that? I forgot the name, but it was like in that high school. It was a couple years ago. It was a high school, but I just remember like they talked to us about like a checklist because my school was like a 6th through like a high school. It was like a middle school and high school. So they talked to us about like what signs could be. And I remember him like always joking about that, but never have I ever heard like somebody who would be like a quote unquote gang member talk about.
One second. So, okay. Danny, do you want to pick up while?
Sure. Yeah, while Amina figures it out. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Y'all good?
Yeah, I don't know. Someone just came in here saying I couldn't be in here. Anyway, I can be in here. I'm fine. But as I was saying, it's like there's a majority of the demographic committing school shootings are white men, and I've never felt like, oh, a gang member is going to come to our school and hurt us all. That's just never been the reality of it. I've always just been like, it's this one good people committing this act, and I'm more scared of that than anything. And I feel like it's very unfair to like assume that POC don't have mental health issues. You know what I mean? Like I feel like if you talk about gun violence as a whole, like not just school shootings, but just shootings in general, it takes something to take the life of somebody. So it's like everyone. We should talk about everyone's mental health, not just focus on one group's. And I feel like it's really unfair to just be like, oh, his school didn't reach out to him, his family didn't see the signs, this and that. But then after, like the family or like friends and stuff come out and be like, well, I'm not surprised. Like, you know what I mean? They'll be like, well, he's always been a little off, or they'll describe the kid and they'll be like, oh, he was a loner, maybe he got bullied. But like, personally, I don't think being bullied is an excuse to shoot up a school, And I think that certain because we have guidance counselors, I'm pretty sure I feel like maybe guidance counselors should be reaching out to people more. And just because at my school, for example, in the beginning of the year we have like mental health surveys where we have to fill them out, and some people get flagged as at risk, and so they call you and they call your parent into the office and you have to go and talk. I was actually put on this list because I thought it was like about quarantine. Everyone went through something on quarantine, so I was just answering the thing obviously, but they didn't call my mom because I said that I felt okay, but they called other people's moms. So maybe what if I was at risk and they just didn't call my mom? That's just the little stuff that people look over. I have not met with that person that met with me since the beginning of the year. I thought maybe we'd do a check-in. Nobody's checked in. Since those mental health check-ins, nobody said anything. So it's very different.
Amina, I'd like to follow up. You mentioned that they gave you a checklist. What were the types of things that were on this checklist that you were supposed to be looking out for?
Yeah. Okay. So I was in seventh grade, so we were supposed to look out for people that were like they stayed alone by themselves, or they were like they're always alone. People that like like wearing dark clothes, stuff like that. Being like if they held their backpack too close to them, or like they were just suspicious. Like if they just look suspicious in general, you're just supposed to report them. But like they were just saying like on the list, like if you know anybody that maybe they were hurt, maybe they were, you know what I mean. If anything that you thought was suspicious, you were supposed to report. And they just listed
Other students in your school?
Yeah, it was just like give it to everyone in the school.
This is Boston Latin Academy?
No. This was in Arizona.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Hey.
No, this is in Arizona. So they gave it to us, and I just remember like our teacher being like, "Yes, if you see anything suspicious, say something." But no, they did not do this here.
Does that seem right to you? Like you're responsible for other students being suspicious and like what other students are going through?
Well, at the time, I didn't really think much of it because I was a seventh grader. I was just starting to get into like, politics and thinking about, what am I, because let's just put this out there. It was a majority white school. Arizona is not that diverse. So I went to a charter school. It was majority white. I was one of like 4 other Black kids that I knew in a school of 1,000 people. So it was like, I had to get into, I don't want to say I had to get into politics, I had to get into stuff like that, but I had to find a way to like defend myself and, have something to relate to. So at the time I was just like, okay, like they just want us to be safe. So like I should probably report anybody that I think of like, being suspicious. So I never really thought about it, but I feel like definitely it could have been used against the wrong kids because that happens all the time. It wasn't, I thinking about it now, it definitely was not right, but if we had more Black kids at our school or more like brown kids in general at our school, then it definitely could have been used wrong. But at that school, they didn't, they mostly just used it to target like kids that were like quiet.
Kanisha, go ahead. Did you have something to say? Okay. Before I shift topics, Danny, did you have anything else to say regarding this? Okay. We have another audience question. And we're gonna shift a little bit to how school shootings are represented in media. What role do you think the media play in the portrayal of mass shootings? And is it your lived reality a little bit different of like how you see the signs and in general? What roles do you think media plays?
I just want to ask as a clarifying question. When you say media, do you mean specifically in terms of like the news, or do you mean overall like social media, television, movies, and everything?
I think personally, when I was reading the question, I was thinking like social media and like news media. However, I would like to open it up a little bit more to like TV shows, movies, and all that stuff now, because now that I'm thinking about it, there are now movies about like school shootings and mass shootings. And that kind of, I don't know, I have like a whole kind of like personal affliction with like how media portrays like traumatic events. Like one of the first things I think of is like Fruitville Station, like impactful story. However, I can't watch it more than once. Like that's a very traumatic thing to watch. And that's like a police shooting. So I would love to get your opinions on, let's start with like movies and TV shows and like scripted media, and then we'll go to news and social media.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood the question properly, because when you asked that question, the first thing I thought of was how things are portrayed. And it's like, I personally don't get in that like in content. Goodness, I do not consume content in that area quite often due to it. It's like, regardless of whether or not people say the portrayals are accurate or actually not that bad, it's like it's a horrifying thing to even conceptualize, regardless of it being fiction or real. To take in content like that is not something that I presently do, but I do know that it's uncomfortable to think that this happens so much so that people can put it into media and it's considered legitimate, if that makes sense. Like it's not something that you could say is imaginative and outlandish. Like, this is something that actually happens in real life. And you can find that in actual news, in addition to like in documentaries or so on and so forth. Like, when you were to watch a TV show or a movie, people could say that this is taken from a real life scenario. It's not exactly how it is, but this is portrayed in what we know that has actually been experienced. I always leave myself at a loss for words when really just taking in like the subject matter that we're talking about right now. Because if you really think about it, like it's gotten to a point where we actually have to have a I'm sorry, did you say something?
No, you were just breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, I noticed there was like a lot of breakup on the screen. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, so you were saying, can you finish your thought about just like the conversations in general that we have to have this conversation in the first place?
Yeah, it's gotten so bad to the point that we have to have this conversation in the first place, and that there are many other places that have to be having these conversations to try to make a difference. And even now, as we're sitting here, we don't really know what's to happen and how much more of an impact this conversation will add to the decision that's coming.
Danny, I'd love to hear your opinion that as an artist, I feel like we get asked a lot to make art regarding these topics, or I don't know. I personally I get asked to, what is the subject matter of my art, etc. And I feel like a lot of the time they're expecting traumatic experiences in our art, as well as we get asked to perform at like a benefit or something like that, and it's about school shootings, etc. What is your opinions on this?
I am a multidisciplinary artist, not a multimedia artist. So I only have a little bit of experience and knowledge, but what I have collected based off of my observation is that when we look at entertainment is just either a reflection of what we have experienced collectively as a human race, or it transcends this world and projects something that we could achieve to fulfill outside of the ramifications of the human race. What do I mean by that? That means that the only reason why we watch traumatic and use traumatic instances for entertainment is because we can watch it without experiencing it in real life. It draws upon the emotion, it draws upon the reaction, but there's a level of distance between you and the instance or the situation that's being portrayed, and that distance is a television or a projection screen or a stage. So when we talk about multimedia and the narrative that is being built and put out there by predominantly white producers, the issue is not about using art for social change. It's about using art for consumption. Because I too watched Fruitville Station, and I watched it once and I've never watched it again. And I watched it very young because of how traumatic it was to me. I did the same thing with Queen and Slim. And the question that I have, or rather my response, is not solely how this makes me feel, but what is being produced and birthed out of this piece of art to then push me in the direction towards social change. If the art does not have a call to action, if the art is not mobilized by the producer, if the narrative or the story that is being crafted by WBUR has no call to action, then we are just reproducing what we've already seen to keep people engaged, but to not get them to change. So when we talk about media, when we talk about what it looks like, what it sounds like, why it's traumatic, most of the time, why it's traumatic is because after you watch that, you don't know how to recover. You're left with a sense of hopelessness. What is always the most fulfilling to see is after I watch a movie that's fiction, right? Most of the time, unless it's nonfiction, unless it happened, it's adapted based off of a true story, to see a call to action after the movie is over. I don't know, was it Jordan Peele who did that recently? I can't remember what the last movie I can't remember what the movie was, but there was a call to action after the film. And in that spirit, when we're producing news articles, when we come out with commercials about gun violence, about safety in schools, when we have these conversations, if we have this panel and there's no call to action, none of us on this call did our job. None of the producers on here who are behind the scenes that none of you all see in the virtual world did their job. And that's because our job is to not just produce, it's to curate art, it's to curate conversation, it's to curate and bring community together so that we can heal. That's what separates an artist who's using their art for social change from an artist who's just doing what they do. And it's our job, our collective job as the human race to not just be focused on things for entertainment's sake, things for news sake, to be able to engage with this, but for community's sake.
I'm gonna follow up with an audience question that I think is like I have my own like question as well, but what are some strategies to getting more youth to advocate against gun violence or just educate them in general? And my problem with this question is, why is it the responsibility of the youth to do that in the first place? And that was one of my questions of, do we feel pressured to even advocate for gun violence when we're not even the people that can get the guns in the first place?
We can't even get the guns. We can't even get the licenses if we wanted to. And then we're not protected by the law because the law was never written to protect us.
There you go. That's the end.
What I will say, Dawry, is that it is our job and responsibility, because if no one else fights for you, you got to fight for yourself.
Exactly.
That's what it takes. It takes you tapping in and mobilizing and building among your peers. That's what AIR is. AIR is not some super big organization that's super, just like, that's not what, it doesn't exist to just build momentum and then to leave. We're building spaces for people to be able to have these conversations so that they can go back into their communities and do the necessary work to unlearn this stuff.
Yes. Amina, Kanisha, do you guys have any responses to that?
Well, I feel like my only response is, I think the youth, almost every single kid I know, because it affects everyone. It affects every single child. And so every single kid I know is against gun violence. We had a walkout for our school like last Friday, or not Friday, it was a couple of Fridays ago. No, was it Tuesday? I don't know. We had a walkout a while ago. And so many years, I've been in so many walkouts for gun violence. I've been in so many. I'm only a 10th grader. I am 16. There's no reason I should have been in so many walkouts for gun violence and stuff like that. So I think the youth is doing their job. They're doing as much as they can. We aren't adults. We can't just, leave school and go storm Congress. We can't do things like that. You know what I mean? We can just advocate for ourselves using the tools that we have. We use social media. We use things that we have access to. And, I think, personally, I think it's the adult's job. It's not our job to, worry about, are we going to be safe at school? What can we do? And I think we are doing enough as a collective. And, maybe there's more we can do, but I think for how young we are and for how long we've been going through this, that we are doing enough.
Kanisha, any final thoughts?
Just that I agree with Danny and Amina from everything that's been happening. The only thing I can really say in like one concise sentiment is that your words only have as much power as the people listening to them. And if people do not want to listen, then your words will no longer have power. And we've been screaming, we've been shouting, we've been doing as much as we can to get them to listen. And if they're not deciding to do that, then it's not to say that we're not taking any responsibility to try to do our part. It's now up to them, because this is an entire effort that you can't just do by yourself. This is one of those things that you can't just, if someone's not doing it right, you got to do it yourself. No, we all have to actively do something, because it's been out of control for way too long. And you know what? By this point, if you're not listening, then we're just going to have to keep being louder and getting more people until finally your ears are blown out.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our guests this hour, Danny Rivera, founder of the Artist Initiative for Revolution, Amina McDowell, a sophomore at Boston Latin Academy and the president of the Black Student Union, and Kanisha Germain, a recent high school graduate in Boston. Let us know what you think of our New Youth Takeover initiative. If you want to please fill out the brief survey via the QR code that's popping up on your screen right now. And then be sure to join us for our next Youth Takeover. It will be live and in person at WBUR CitySpace on Tuesday, July 19th. So please join us for that. Thank you so much. Sorry, there's no QR code, but it will be sent out to those who joined us. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us within the hour, and we'll see you on July 19th.